The classified Cold War facility that remained hidden beneath American soil for over 6 decades. A top-secret communications center that the Pentagon had marked as decommissioned in 1962, yet appeared structurally untouched. All discovered because one desperate mother purchased the cheapest property she could find, a crumbling barn sitting on a forgotten piece of land in rural Montana that would soon bring Joint Chiefs of Staff helicopters landing in her front yard. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first snowfall of the season dusted the Montana landscape as Sarah Mitchell guided her aging Subaru along the unpaved access road, leading to what the locals simply called the old Henderson place. Wind whistled through the car's imperfect seals as Emma, her 14-year-old daughter, pressed her face against the passenger window, her expression a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "This is seriously it?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the distinctive inflection of teenage disappointment. "It looks even worse than the pictures online." Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to maintain an optimistic facade despite her own sinking feeling. At 38, the single mother of 2 had spent nearly every dollar of her modest savings on this 5-acre property, the only real estate she could afford after being priced out of Riverstone's increasingly expensive housing market. The rehabilitation clinic where she worked as a physical therapist had cut her hours back to part-time, and the medical bills from Ethan's sports injury last spring had depleted her emergency fund. "It's a fixer-upper," Sarah admitted, pulling up beside the weathered farmhouse with its peeling white paint and sagging porch steps. "But it's ours. No more landlords, no more rent increases, just property taxes and whatever repairs we can manage ourselves." From the back seat, 11-year-old Ethan leaned forward, his eyes wide with an enthusiasm his sister clearly didn't share. "Mom, look at all that space. Can I get a dog now? You always said we couldn't have one in the apartment because there wasn't enough room." Sarah smiled at her son's unwaveringly positive outlook. "Let's get settled first, buddy. There's a lot of work to do before we start adding family members." As they stepped out of the car, the true scale of their new home's condition became unavoidably clear. The farmhouse itself, a modest 2-story structure built in the 1940s, appeared structurally sound despite its cosmetic neglect. The barn, however, was another story entirely. Its massive red form, listed noticeably to one side, missing shingles created patchy gaps in the roof, and what had once been a hay loft door hung by a single rusted hinge. Emma surveyed their new property with poorly concealed horror. "We're literally in the middle of nowhere. How am I supposed to see my friends?" "Riverstone is only 45 minutes away," Sarah reminded her, though she understood her daughter's concern. The isolation had been part of the property's affordability, and its long-neglected condition. "And you'll make new friends at Pinewood Valley High." "The school has like 200 students total," Emma muttered, kicking at the gravel driveway. As Sarah began unloading essential supplies from their car, a battered pickup truck appeared. On the access road, approaching at a deliberate pace before pulling up beside them, an older man with weathered features and a neatly trimmed white beard stepped out, nodding in greeting. "Thought I saw someone turning in," he said, his voice gravelly but not unwelcoming. "Frank Thompson. My place is about half a mile down the main road. Been keeping an eye on this property since old Henderson passed." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, extending her hand. "These are my children, Emma and Ethan. We just bought the place." Frank's handshake was firm, his calloused palms speaking. "To a lifetime of physical labor. Henderson's place has been empty going on 5 years now. Bank finally decided to unload it, I guess." He glanced at the deteriorating barn with a critical eye, That thing's been waiting to collapse since the Reagan administration. You planning to tear it down? Sarah followed his gaze mentally, calculating how much demolition might cost. Money she simply didn't have. Eventually, maybe. For now, we're focusing on making the house livable. Frank nodded, seemingly approving of this practical approach. Well, I know a thing or two about construction. Worked as a contractor after I got out of the service. Retired now, but I'd be willing to take a look at your roof before winter really sets in. Montana snow can be unforgiving on neglected shingles. That would be very kind, Sarah said, feeling a small measure of relief at this unexpected neighborly offer. Kindness from strangers had been in short supply during their last years in Riverstone. Frank gestured toward the barn. Wouldn't let the kids play in there, though. Place is a death trap waiting to happen. It's probably full of rats anyway, Emma added helpfully, eliciting a disappointed look from her brother. After Frank departed, with a promise to return the following day, the Mitchell family spent their first evening in their new home, unpacking essentials and establishing sleeping arrangements. The house was cold and drafty, but the previous owners had at least left behind some basic furniture, a kitchen table with mismatched chairs, an old couch with worn cushions, and beds that needed only clean sheets to be serviceable. As Sarah tucked Ethan into bed that night, his boundless optimism provided a much-needed counterbalance to her own anxieties. "This is going to be our best home ever, Mom," he declared with absolute conviction. "I can feel it." She kissed his forehead, smoothing back his sandy brown hair. "I hope you're right, buddy. Get some sleep now. We have a lot of unpacking to do tomorrow." Later, sitting alone at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and a notepad covered in to-do lists and budget calculations, Sarah allowed herself a moment of doubt. The property had stretched her finances to the breaking point, and the house needed far more work than she had initially estimated. The winter would be challenging with the building's poor insulation and aging heating system, but she'd make it work somehow. She always did. The next morning brought watery sunlight and the promised return of Frank Thompson, this time with a ladder strapped to his truck and a toolbox in the bed. Ethan immediately appointed himself Frank's assistant, trailing the older man around the property as he assessed the most critical repair needs. "Roof's not great, but it'll hold if we patch those damaged sections," Frank reported, climbing down from his inspection. "The gutters need cleaning out before they freeze up, and that north-facing window has some rot around the frame that should be addressed." Sarah nodded, making notes and mentally adjusting her limited budget. "What about the electrical system? Some of the outlets don't seem to be working." "Probably old knob and tube wiring in parts of the house," Frank said. "Not uncommon in these old places. I can take a look at the breaker box, but you might need a professional electrician for anything major." While Frank tackled the roof patching, Sarah began clearing decades of accumulated dust and cobwebs from the house's interior. Emma, after initially refusing to help, eventually joined in when her phone battery died and she discovered the property's spotty cell service. "This place doesn't even have Wi-Fi," she complained, half-heartedly wiping dust from a windowsill. "How am I supposed to do homework?" "The internet company is coming next week," Sarah assured her, though the installation fee had been another unexpected expense. "And Frank mentioned the library in town has free Wi-Fi and computers if you need them before then." By mid-afternoon, with Frank's help, they had addressed the most urgent house repairs. Sarah insisted on paying him for his time, but he waved away the offered money. "Keep it for materials," he said. "Winter's coming, and you'll need that cash for insulation and heating. Besides, it's nice having neighbors again. Place has been empty too long." As Frank gathered his tools, Ethan tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mom, can I explore the barn? Just to look. I promise I won't climb on anything." Sarah hesitated, recalling Frank's warning about the structure's instability. "I don't think that's a good idea, buddy. Frank said it's dangerous." The main support beams are actually solid oak, Frank interjected, surprising Sarah. It's the roof and some of the upper framework that's compromised. The ground floor should be stable enough for a quick look, as long as you stay away from that western wall where the water damage is worst. He glanced at Sarah. Might be some useful materials in there you could salvage before winter. Old Henderson was something of a pack rat. With Frank accompanying them as a safety precaution, Sarah agreed to a brief exploration of the barn's interior. The massive sliding door protested loudly as Frank forced it open along rusted tracks, releasing a musty odor of aged wood, dust, and something vaguely metallic. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, creating shafts of illumination that spotlighted the barn's contents. Rusted farm equipment, stacks of weathered lumber, old furniture draped in tattered canvas coverings, and numerous boxes filled with unidentifiable miscellany. "Look at all this stuff," Ethan exclaimed, his eyes wide with the treasure-hunting excitement only a child could muster for such neglected items. "Junk is more like it," Emma muttered, though she too began curiously examining the barn's contents. Frank ran a hand along one of the massive support beams. "Oak like this is worth something if you ever decided to have the barn professionally, dismantled rather than demolished. They don't build with timber like this anymore." Sarah nodded absently, mentally cataloguing items that might be salvageable or useful. An old wooden workbench could be restored for the house, and some of the shelving units might work in the basement for storage. "Mom, what's this?" Ethan called from the back corner of the barn, where he stood beside what appeared to be a large metal door set into the concrete floor. Sarah joined her son, kneeling beside the unexpected feature. The door was approximately 4 feet square, made of heavy-gauge steel with an industrial-looking locking mechanism. A faded stencil across its surface read, "Utility Access, Authorized Personnel Only." "Probably an old well access or maybe a fruit cellar," Frank suggested, though his furrowed brow suggested uncertainty. A lot of these old properties had underground storage for preserving food through winter. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah attempted to turn the handle, but the mechanism refused to budge. It's locked or rusted shut. "Henderson probably has a key somewhere in the house," Frank said. "Man never threw anything away from what I heard." Their exploration continued, yielding a few useful items and generating a surprising amount of enthusiasm from both children about the possibilities of restoration projects. By the time they returned to the house, even Emma had developed a reluctant interest in their new home's potential. That evening, after Frank had departed with a promise to return the following weekend, Sarah began a more thorough exploration of the house's storage areas, hoping to locate a key to the mysterious barn door. The basement revealed numerous boxes of household items left behind by previous owners, while a small attic space contained holiday decorations and outdated clothing. It was in a kitchen drawer, buried beneath miscellaneous utensils and instruction manuals, that she finally discovered a ring of old keys with a faded tag labeled Barn Storage Access. The following morning, Sarah returned to the barn alone while the children organized their rooms. With flashlight in hand, she tried several keys before finding one that fit the floor door's lock. The mechanism turned with surprising ease, suggesting it had been maintained despite the barn's overall neglect. The heavy door opened to reveal a set of concrete steps descending into darkness. Sarah shone her flashlight down the stairwell, illuminating what appeared to be a small landing about 10 feet below. Curiosity overcoming caution, she carefully made her way down the steps, noting the unusual sturdiness of the construction compared to the deteriorating barn above. At the landing, she discovered another door, this one even more substantial than the first, resembling something from a bank vault more than a farm storage cellar. A keypad was mounted beside it, along with a Faded sign reading restricted area, federal property, unauthorized entry prohibited by law. Sarah stood frozen in place, her flashlight beam wavering slightly as implications began to form in her mind. This was clearly no ordinary root cellar or storage space. The construction quality, the warning sign, the electronic keypad, which appeared non-functional, its display dark, all suggested something far more significant than agricultural storage. Returning to the house, Sarah immediately began searching online for information about the property's history, but the rural location's spotty internet connection yielded little beyond basic land records showing the Henderson family had purchased the farm in 1968. Nothing indicated previous federal ownership or usage. That evening, she called Frank, whose decades in the area might provide insights the internet couldn't. His lengthy pause after she described her discovery was telling. "You found the bunker," he said finally, his tone measured. "There were rumors about that place when I first moved here in the 80s. Henderson never talked about it, but some of the old-timers mentioned the government built something out that way during the Cold War. Most folks thought it was just small town gossip. So there really might be some kind of federal facility under my barn?" Sarah asked, a mixture of fascination and concern coursing through her. "Might be worth talking to someone who'd know for sure," Frank suggested. "There's a fella over at Riverstone Community College. Dr. Reynolds teaches history, specializes in Cold War architecture, military installations and such. Interviewed me once about my time in the service during the 60s. If anyone would know about something like this, it'd be him." The next day, after dropping Emma at her new school orientation, Sarah drove with Ethan to Riverstone Community College, where they managed to catch Dr. Marcus Reynolds between classes. The professor, a bespectacled man in his mid-50s with an enthusiastic demeanor, listened intently to Sarah's description of her discovery. "A keypad-secured underground facility from the Cold War era, you say? On private property?" His eyes lit with scholarly excitement. "Do you have photographs?" Sarah showed him the pictures she'd taken of both doors and the stairwell. Dr. Reynolds examined them with growing animation. "These construction techniques are consistent with government installations from the late 1950s or early 1960s, he confirmed, enlarging one image on his tablet. "The signage formatting and this particular lock design were standard for certain types of STRATCOM facilities." "STRATCOM?" Sarah asked. "Strategic Air Command. Though it's been reorganized since then. They managed America's nuclear deterrent during the Cold War." He studied the images again. "This keypad design is particularly interesting. It's a Dawson Series 5. They were used exclusively for government installations with specific security requirements. So, this is definitely some kind of military bunker?" Sarah clarified, glancing at Ethan, who was listening with rapt attention. "Almost certainly, though what exactly it was used for would depend on its size and configuration," Dr. Reynolds replied. "Many smaller installations were communication nodes or emergency relay stations. The government built hundreds of them during the height of Cold War tensions, creating redundant systems in case of nuclear attack. Would records of something like this exist? The property deed doesn't mention any government installations." Dr. Reynolds stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Many of these facilities were officially decommissioned in the 1970s and 80s when technology advanced beyond their capabilities. Ownership was often transferred to private citizens with non-disclosure agreements, which might explain why your Henderson never discussed it." He paused. "With your permission, I'd very much like to see this installation firsthand. It could be historically significant." Sarah hesitated briefly, considering the implications of having a potentially important government facility underneath her newly purchased property. "Would I need to notify someone official about this? I don't want to get in trouble for owning something classified." A prudent concern, Dr. Reynolds acknowledged. Let me make some inquiries through proper channels. I have contacts at Fort Bridger's Military Research Archive who could determine if this facility has been properly decommissioned or if it still falls under federal jurisdiction. 2 days later, Dr. Reynolds arrived at the Mitchell property, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Colonel Diane Harper from Military Intelligence Archives. The colonel's crisp uniform and professional demeanor lent an official gravity to what had begun as a simple house renovation project. Mrs. Mitchell, Colonel Harper began, based on Dr. Reynolds' description and the photographs you provided, we believe your property may contain Installation 49C, a communication relay bunker constructed in 1958 as part of the Codelight network. If you're amenable, we'd like to examine the facility to confirm its identity and status. With Sarah's permission, they proceeded to the barn, where Colonel Harper examined the entrance with evident interest. The external access appears unmodified. Since decommissioning, she noted, photographing the doorway and lock mechanism. Records indicate this facility was officially closed in 1962, after the Cuban Missile Crisis prompted upgrades to more advanced systems. As they descended the stairs, Colonel Harper produced a small device that she attached to the keypad beside the inner door. After several minutes of electronic interfacing, the pad surprisingly illuminated, displaying a green ready signal. "Remarkable," she murmured. "Backup power systems still functional after all these decades." With practiced efficiency, she entered a sequence of numbers, causing the massive door to emit a series of mechanical clicks before slowly swinging inward with a rush of stale, preserved air. What lay beyond exceeded anything Sarah could have imagined. The flashlight beams revealed not a small storage room or simple communication relay, but an expansive underground complex. The main chamber extended at least 50 feet, with multiple doorways leading to additional rooms. Vintage electronic equipment lined the walls, control panels with analog displays, reel-to-reel tape recorders, and what appeared to be early computer systems. "This isn't just a relay station," Dr. Reynolds whispered, his academic excitement barely contained. "This is a full command and control center, preserved exactly as it was left." Colonel Harper moved through the space with increasing urgency, examining equipment and opening cabinets filled with technical manuals and logbooks. "This facility was never properly decommissioned," she stated flatly. "The equipment should have been removed, documentation secured. Everything is still in place, including..." She paused at a large safe in the corner of the room, its heavy door slightly ajar. Carefully pulling it open, she revealed shelves of film canisters, paper documents, and sealed containers with faded top-secret stamps clearly visible. "Mrs. Mitchell," Colonel Harper said, her tone now formal, "I need to contact my superiors immediately. What you've discovered here may be of significant national security interest." Within hours, the quiet Montana property transformed into a hive of official activity. Military vehicles arrived discreetly at first, 2 unmarked SUVs and a technical team in civilian clothing. By nightfall, a perimeter had been established around the barn. Portable lights illuminated the area, and a small command post had been set up near the house. Sarah and her children watched with a mixture of amazement and apprehension as their new home became the center of what was clearly a major operation. Colonel Harper, to her credit, ensured the family was kept informed of developments that didn't involve classified information. The facility contains historical documentation that was supposed to be transferred to secure archives decades ago, she explained to Sarah that evening. The fact that it remained here, apparently forgotten by the system, represents a significant oversight that we're now correcting. "Will we lose our property?" Sarah asked directly, voicing the fear that had been growing since the scale of official interest became clear. Absolutely not, Colonel Harper assured her. The underground facility itself remains government property, but your ownership of the land and structures is unaffected. Once we've secured the sensitive materials, we'll discuss appropriate arrangements for accessing the bunker in the future. The following morning brought the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors as 3 military aircraft landed in the open field adjacent to the house. From the lead helicopter emerged a distinguished older man in full military dress, accompanied by an entourage of officers and advisors. Colonel Harper met Sarah on the porch as the delegation approached. Mrs. Mitchell, may I present General James Wilson of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General, this is Sarah Mitchell, the property owner. The general extended his hand with surprising warmth. Mrs. Mitchell, on behalf of the United States government, I want to express our sincere appreciation for your cooperation in this matter. You've unwittingly helped recover historically significant materials that provide crucial insights into our nation's Cold War strategic planning. The scene unfolding on Sarah Mitchell's newly purchased property seemed surreal. Joint Chiefs of Staff helicopters dotting her field, military personnel establishing secure perimeters, and communication equipment being set up around the barn that had appeared worthless just days before. General Wilson's presence signified the extraordinary importance of what lay beneath the weathered structure. If you're comfortable with it, Mrs. Mitchell, General Wilson continued, I'd appreciate your joining us for a briefing on what we've found. As the property owner, you deserve to understand the significance of this discovery. Sarah glanced back at the farmhouse where Emma and Ethan watched wide-eyed from the living room window. My children are welcome to join us, the general interjected. What we'll be discussing has been declassified as of this morning. Historical significance rather than current security concerns. Inside the hastily established command tent, Sarah and her children were shown to seats at a conference table, where several officials and technical specialists had gathered. Large monitors displayed schematics of the underground facility, while photographs of recovered documents covered one wall. Colonel Harper began the briefing with practiced efficiency. Installation 49C, codenamed Autumn Shelter, was constructed in 1958 as part of a network of communication and command facilities designed to maintain government continuity during a potential nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. Unlike smaller relay stations, Autumn Shelter was designed as a regional command center capable of coordinating military and civilian response across 5 states in the event primary command structures were compromised. Dr. Reynolds, who had been invited to the briefing as a historical consultant, could barely contain his excitement. What makes this discovery extraordinary is that Autumn Shelter represents the only fully preserved facility of its kind. All others were either repurposed, stripped of equipment, or demolished during the 1980s and 1990s. General Wilson nodded in agreement. The facility appears to have been abandoned in haste during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when personnel were reassigned to higher priority installations. Essentially, Autumn Shelter was forgotten in the shuffle, listed as decommissioned in our records, but never actually processed according to protocols. Digital images appeared on the main screen showing the bunker's interior, rows of communication equipment, situation rooms with tactical maps still mounted on walls, and sleeping quarters with military-issue blankets still folded at the foot of each bed. It's like a time capsule, one of the technical specialists commented. Even the coffee cups were left behind, some still half full, now with 6 decades of evaporation and dust. Emma, who had maintained an air of teenage disinterest since their move to the property, leaned forward with newfound engagement. So people were actually living down there ready for nuclear war? Colonel Harper addressed her question directly. Not permanently, but yes. The facility was designed for a crew of 12 to operate continuously for up to 6 months without external support. Self-contained power, water filtration, air recycling, and substantial supply caches. Sarah tried to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. And this was just sitting under our barn all this time. How does something this significant get forgotten? General Wilson's expression turned somber. The Cold War era generated thousands of classified projects, Mrs. Mitchell. During periods of heightened tension, construction and contingency planning happened at an extraordinary pace. When priorities shifted, some facilities fell through. Administrative cracks, especially those in remote locations like this one. He gestured toward the document photographs. What makes Autumn Shelter particularly significant is the tactical documentation left behind. The facility contained original contingency plans, communication protocols, and strategic assessments that provide unprecedented insight into military thinking during one of history's most precarious moments. Dr. Reynolds expanded on this point with scholarly enthusiasm. From a historical perspective, these documents represent a remarkable find. They include detailed response scenarios for various Soviet aggressive actions, civilian evacuation, plans, and even psychological assessments of how the American population might react to prolonged nuclear standoff. The briefing continued with technical specialists explaining the sophisticated equipment discovered in the bunker, early warning systems, secure communication technologies, and prototype computer systems that predated widespread commercial computing. Ethan, displaying his characteristic curiosity, raised his hand with a question that momentarily silenced the room. If nobody's checked this place in like 60 years, how come the electricity still works down there? Colonel Harper said the keypad turned on. D, the technical specialist, exchanged glances before one answered. That's actually one of the most remarkable aspects of the discovery. Autumn Shelter was equipped with an experimental power system, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator similar to what we later used in space exploration. It produces electricity from radioactive decay, allowing for decades of autonomous operation. At the mention of radioactive materials, Sarah straightened with immediate concern. Is it dangerous? Should we be worried about radiation? Not at all, the specialist assured her quickly. The RTG is heavily shielded and contained within a specially designed chamber. Radiation levels have been continuously monitored since our arrival and remain well within safe parameters. These generators were designed with multiple redundant safety features. As the briefing concluded, General Wilson addressed the practical matters that had been weighing on Sarah's mind. Mrs. Mitchell will need approximately 2 weeks to properly document and secure the sensitive materials within the facility. During this time, we'll establish a temporary easement for accessing the property, with fair compensation for any disruption to your family. He slid a folder across the table. This contains our proposal for ongoing arrangements. In essence, the United States government would like to purchase a limited access easement to the underground facility while leaving your ownership of the property and structures completely intact. The proposed compensation is outlined on page 3. Sarah opened the folder, her eyes widening at the figure presented. The offered amount for the easement and temporary inconvenience was more than she had paid for the entire property, enough to complete all necessary renovations to the farmhouse with substantial funds remaining. Additionally, General Wilson continued, given the historical significance of Autumn Shelter, the Department of Defense would like to explore the possibility of eventually establishing a small, secure museum space within a portion of the facility, with strictly controlled access and appropriate security measures, of course. This would involve additional compensation and potential employment opportunities for local residents as guides or facility managers. The proposal was overwhelming, transforming what had been a desperate financial situation into unexpected stability. Sarah requested time to consider the offer, which General Wilson readily granted. That evening, after the day's activities had quieted and the children had gone to bed, Sarah sat on the farmhouse's porch with Frank Thompson, who had arrived to check on them amid the military presence. "Quite a change from fixing roof leaks," Frank observed, accepting the cup of coffee Sarah offered. "I suspected there might be something unusual under that barn, but nothing of this scale." Sarah nodded, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. "They want to create a museum eventually. Apparently what's down there is historically important enough to preserve for educational purposes." Frank's weathered face creased with a smile. "Henderson would have gotten a kick out of that. Man was always interested in history, used to read these thick military biography books on his porch during summer evenings." He paused, glancing toward the illuminated barn where work continued through the night. "You planning to accept their offer?" "I'm leaning that way," Sarah admitted. "The compensation would solve our immediate financial concerns, and the ongoing arrangement would provide stability we haven't had in years." She gestured toward the house. "We could actually make this place a proper home, not just something we're enduring because it's all we could afford." Frank nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking, and having a classified Cold War facility turned museum would certainly make for interesting dinner conversation." The following days established a new rhythm for the Mitchell family as military personnel worked methodically to document and secure the underground facility. Rather than being alienated by the government presence, Sarah found herself increasingly involved in discussions about the bunker's future. Colonel Harper, who remained on site as the project coordinator, proved particularly interested in Sarah's input regarding how the facility might eventually function as an educational resource. "Your property sits at the intersection of ordinary American life and extraordinary historical significance," Colonel Harper explained as they reviewed preliminary museum concepts. "That perspective should inform how we present this discovery to future visitors." Emma, whose initial resistance to rural life had been gradually softening, unexpectedly became engaged with the historical aspects of the project. Her high school history teacher, upon learning of the discovery, had assigned her a special research project documenting the community's Cold War connections. "Did you know Pinewood Valley had 3 families who built personal fallout shelters during the 1960s? She informed Sarah one evening. "Mr. Peterson at the Historical Society showed me the building permits. People were really scared about nuclear war." Ethan, meanwhile, had become something of a mascot among the technical teams, his endless questions and genuine curiosity earning him impromptu lessons in Cold War communication systems and computer history. One of the specialists had even brought him a decommissioned piece of vintage radio equipment as a souvenir. 10 days into the operation, Dr. Reynolds arrived with exciting news. "We've managed to access the facility's secure document storage," he announced as he joined Sarah for coffee. "Among the materials, we found something remarkable. The personal journal of Major Robert Lawton, the installation's last commanding officer." He carefully placed a leather-bound volume on the kitchen table, its pages yellowed but preserved in the bunker's controlled environment. Lawton documented everything during those tense days of October 1962. His final entry explains why Autumn shelter was abandoned so abruptly. Sarah carefully opened the journal to the marked page, reading the decisive entry. October 23rd, 1962. Orders received to transfer all personnel and essential documentation to Stratcom headquarters effective immediately. No time for standard decommissioning protocols. Team will secure the facility and report to Omaha by 0600 tomorrow. Strange to leave everything behind after years of preparation, but the situation with Cuba is deteriorating hourly. If the worst happens, I doubt this installation would matter much in the grand scheme. May God help us all in the days ahead. The Cuban Missile Crisis nearly led to nuclear conflict, Dr. Reynolds explained softly. These men were pulled to Central Command, likely because their expertise was needed for potential wartime operations. In the aftermath, when tensions eventually eased, the proper decommissioning of this remote facility simply fell through administrative cracks. Sarah felt a strange connection to Major Lawton and his team, men who had walked away from their underground post in a moment of global crisis, never to return. They left thinking they might be heading toward war, she murmured. Instead, humanity stepped back from the brink and inadvertently created one of the most perfectly preserved Cold War facilities in existence, Dr. Reynolds added. The historical value is incalculable. By the end of the second week, Sarah had signed the agreements with the Department of Defense, establishing both immediate compensation and a framework for the facility's future development as a limited-access historical site. The terms were generous, including provisions for property improvements, educational opportunities for her children, and potential employment associated with the future museum. As the major military presence prepared to withdraw, leaving only a small security detail to continue cataloging the bunker's contents, General Wilson made a final visit to review the arrangements personally. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said as they walked the property's perimeter, "I want to express my appreciation for your cooperation throughout this process. Not everyone would have been so accommodating with dozens of military personnel suddenly descending on their new home." Sarah smiled, gesturing toward the farmhouse, where fresh paint now brightened the exterior and new windows had been installed. Improvements funded by the initial compensation payment. "The arrangement has been mutually beneficial, General. My family has security we didn't think possible a month ago." The General nodded thoughtfully. "There's something appropriate about this outcome. A facility designed for crisis response, ultimately providing stability for a family in need of it." He paused near the barn, its roof now properly repaired and reinforced. The historical preservation team will arrive next month to begin preparing portions of the bunker for eventual public access. Colonel Harper will remain your primary point of contact for any concerns or questions. As the military helicopters departed that afternoon, their thunderous rotors fading into the distance, Sarah stood with her children on the porch of what now truly felt like their home. The rapid transformation of their circumstances still seemed somewhat dreamlike, from desperate financial straits to unexpected stability in less than a month. "So we're staying here for good?" Ethan asked, watching the last helicopter disappear over the mountain ridge. "Yes, we're staying," Sarah confirmed, her arm around his shoulders. "What do you think about that?" His face broke into a wide smile. "I think it's awesome. Can I get that dog now?" Emma, whose initial resistance had evolved into reluctant appreciation, glanced toward the barn that concealed their extraordinary discovery. "It's still weird that we live on top of a secret cold war bunker," she said. "But I guess weird can sometimes be interesting." Sarah laughed, pulling her daughter into a side hug. "Sometimes the things that seem like burdens turn out to be blessings in disguise." Frank Thompson's truck appeared on the access road, the older man arriving for their now regular evening coffee on the porch. As he approached, Sarah reflected on how quickly their isolation had transformed into community, not just with Frank, but with the researchers, historians, and even military personnel who had become part of their daily lives. "Military circus finally pulling out?" Frank asked as he settled into what had become his usual chair. "Most of them," Sarah confirmed. "A security team stays until the preservation specialists arrive next month." Frank nodded approvingly. talked to some folks in town today. Word's getting around about the discovery. People are already speculating about what this might mean for Pinewood Valley when the museum eventually opens. Tourist dollars could make a big difference for local businesses. The ripple effects of their discovery were extending beyond their property lines, potentially revitalizing a rural community that had been gradually declining for decades. What had begun as Sarah's desperate attempt to secure affordable housing had unexpectedly positioned her at the center of a historical preservation effort with far-reaching implications. As winter settled fully over Montana, the Mitchell family embraced their new circumstances with growing confidence. The farmhouse, now properly insulated and equipped with a reliable heating system, provided comfortable shelter against the seasonal storms. Ethan had indeed gotten his dog, a shelter rescue named Bunker, whose name seemed particularly fitting given their unusual home. Emma's initial social concerns proved less problematic than anticipated. Her unique living situation and connection to the historically significant discovery had transformed her from anonymous new student to someone of interest among her peers. The research project on local Cold War history had evolved into a presentation for the entire school, establishing her academic reputation and helping forge new friendships. Sarah had secured a position at the local medical center, her physical therapy skills filling a crucial need in the rural community. The shorter commute and more manageable cost of living had eliminated the financial pressure that had dominated her life in Riverstone, while the compensation arrangement with the Department of Defense provided a crucial safety net. The underground facility itself continued to yield historical treasures as preservation specialists meticulously documented its contents. Each discovery added dimensions to the planned educational presentation, from communication technologies that had preceded modern computing to civil defense protocols that revealed how authorities had planned to manage civilian populations during nuclear crisis. Dr. Reynolds had become a frequent visitor, his academic expertise providing historical context for the facility's significance, while his genuine enthusiasm made him a welcome guest. His connection to Riverstone Community College had created opportunities for educational collaborations, including potential scholarship programs for local students interested in historical preservation or national security studies. Colonel Harper, though technically assigned to oversee security arrangements, had developed a professional friendship with Sarah, often joining the family for dinner during her visits to the property. Her military background provided a unique perspective that helped Sarah understand the broader significance of what they had discovered beneath their barn. The Autumn Shelter Facility represents a physical manifestation of one of history's most precarious moments, Colonel Harper explained during one such dinner. These men were preparing for a war they hoped would never happen, creating systems designed to function in the aftermath of unprecedented destruction. It seems so distant now, Sarah observed, like something from another world. Yet the human element remains remarkably familiar, the colonel replied. Reading through Major Lawton's journal entries, you encounter the same concerns that would preoccupy any of us. Worry for family members in other locations, uncertainty about the future, the tension between duty and self-preservation. This human dimension became central to the developing museum concept, focusing not just on the technological and strategic aspects of the facility, but on the individuals who had staffed it during the height of Cold War tensions. Personal effects discovered in the sleeping quarters, photographs, letters, even a half-completed crossword puzzle provided glimpses into the lives of those who had stood watch beneath the Montana landscape, prepared for catastrophic events that fortunately never materialized. As spring began to transform the property, the physical changes reflected the Mitchell family's journey from uncertainty to stability. The once neglected fields had been cleared and partially planted with a community garden project coordinated through the local school. The farmhouse exterior gleamed with fresh paint, while inside, rooms that had initially felt foreign and temporary now contained the comfortable accumulation of family life. The barn itself had undergone the most dramatic transformation. Professionally, reinforced and restored, its massive red structure no longer leaned precariously, but stood as a properly preserved historical building. A discreet addition housed the security equipment and access controls for the underground facility, designed to blend architecturally with the original structure while providing necessary modern functionality. On a particularly beautiful May morning, Sarah stood watching as Ethan and Bunker played fetch in the field where military helicopters had landed just months earlier. Emma sat on the porch steps, alternating between homework and text conversations with friends. Her initial resistance to rural life now a fading memory. Colonel Harper approached, having arrived for scheduled meetings with the preservation team. "They look happy," she observed, following Sarah's gaze toward the children. "Settled." "We all are," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes I have to remind myself how differently things could have turned out. If we hadn't found the property, if Ethan hadn't noticed that access door." "Serendipity has a way of appearing in retrospect," Colonel Harper replied thoughtfully. "The right person in the right place at the right time, even if none of it seems right in the moment." The preservation team had established a target date for the limited opening of the Autumn Shelter historical site, with carefully managed tours beginning that summer. The Department of Defense, in conjunction with historical preservation organizations, had developed protocols balancing educational access with security considerations and respect for the Mitchell family's privacy. Sarah had been offered a formal position as the site's resident director, a role that would complement her medical work while providing additional income and the ability to remain closely involved with the project that had transformed her family's circumstances. Dr. Reynolds, whose academic standing had been enhanced by his association with the discovery, had secured funding for a comprehensive research initiative documenting Cold War infrastructure across the region. His genuine appreciation for Sarah's role in preserving this historical treasure had evolved into something more personal. Their shared interest in the project creating a foundation for a deepening relationship. Frank Thompson, whose neighborly intervention had helped make the property livable during those first challenging weeks, had become something of an honorary grandfather to Ethan and Emma. His extensive knowledge of the region's history and his own military experiences provided valuable context for understanding Autumn Shelter's place in the community's past. The department has finalized the educational grant program, Colonel Harper informed Sarah as they walked toward the barn. Starting this fall, qualifying students from Pinewood Valley High School will be eligible for scholarships focused on historical preservation, national security studies, or related fields. This initiative, developed as part of the broader community benefit package associated with the historical site, represented yet another positive ripple effect from their extraordinary discovery. What had begun as Sarah's desperate attempt to secure affordable housing for her family had expanded to create educational opportunities for young people throughout the region. Inside the barn, the access point to the underground facility had been professionally modified to accommodate both security requirements and eventual visitor access. A newly installed elevator system would allow controlled entry for scheduled tours, while state-of-the-art monitoring equipment ensured the preserved artifacts remained protected. Sarah descended with Colonel Harper to review recent developments in the preservation effort. The main communication center had been meticulously restored to its 1962 condition, vintage equipment refurbished to operational status for demonstration purposes without compromising historical authenticity. Display cases now housed carefully selected documents and artifacts, presenting the facility's significance within the broader context of Cold War history. Interactive educational stations designed by specialists from the Smithsonian provided engaging explanations of technical systems for visitors of varying ages and knowledge levels. Most poignantly, a dedicated section honored the men who had served at Autumn Shelter, presenting their photographs alongside excerpts from recovered documents and personal items. Major Lawton's journal occupied a central position, open to his final entry, recording the abrupt departure during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The advance tour reservations have already filled through September, Colonel Harper noted as they examined the completed exhibition areas, historical preservation societies, educational institutions, military history enthusiasts. There's extraordinary interest in what you've discovered here. What we discovered together, Sarah corrected, acknowledging the collaborative effort that had transformed an abandoned underground bunker into a meaningful historical resource. As they returned to the surface, emerging from the preserved, passed into spring sunshine, Sarah paused to appreciate the full scope of their journey. The property that had initially represented last resort housing, a desperate measure born of financial necessity, had revealed itself as something far more valuable than she could have imagined. Beyond the material improvements and financial stability, their discovery had provided something less tangible but equally important: purpose and connection. Emma and Ethan had found their places in the community, developing confidence and interests that would shape their futures. Sarah herself had discovered new dimensions to her capabilities, balancing her healthcare work with responsibilities as a steward of historical preservation. The Cold War facility beneath their barn, built during humanity's closest approach to nuclear catastrophe, had ultimately created opportunity and stability for a family that had been facing its own personal crisis. There was a certain poetry in this outcome, a redemptive arc that transformed a structure designed for worst-case scenarios into a foundation for rebuilding lives. As Sarah watched Ethan racing across the field with Bunker bounding alongside him, she reflected on how completely their circumstances had changed in less than a year. The burden she had reluctantly accepted had become the blessing she had never anticipated, reminding her that sometimes the most significant discoveries come disguised as misfortune. The Joint Chiefs of Staff helicopters that had so dramatically arrived on their property months earlier had departed, leaving behind not just a historical preservation project, but a renewed family whose uncertain future had found solid ground beneath a weathered barn in rural Montana. A year had passed since the discovery of Autumn Shelter beneath Sarah Mitchell's barn, and the once-forgotten Cold War facility had evolved into something none of the initial participants could have predicted. What began as a classified military recovery operation had blossomed into a nationally recognized historical preservation project that transformed not just the Mitchell family's circumstances, but the economic landscape of Pinewood Valley itself. The Autumn Shelter, historical site officially opened to the public on a crisp September morning, with dignitaries from the Department of Defense, the Smithsonian Institution, and various historical preservation organizations gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sarah stood at the podium, her children beside her, addressing an audience that included journalists from major networks and publications. What we discovered beneath our barn wasn't just a relic of Cold War strategy, she told the assembled crowd. It was a testament to how ordinary places can contain extraordinary history, and how that history, when properly preserved, can build bridges between past and present. General Wilson, who had returned for the ceremony, spoke about the unique collaborative model that had developed around the site. The partnership between the Mitchell family, the Department of Defense, and the historical preservation community represents a new paradigm for how we approach sites of national security significance. This facility tells an important story about our nation's history, while respecting the property rights and privacy of the family who brought it to light. Issues. The carefully designed visitor experience began in a purpose-built welcome center adjacent to the barn, where multimedia presentations provided historical context about the Cold War era and the strategic importance of facilities like Autumn Shelter. From there, small guided tours descended via the newly installed elevator to explore portions of the underground complex that had been prepared for public access. What made the site particularly compelling was its perfect preservation, a genuine time capsule from one of history's most tense periods. Unlike reconstructed historical exhibits, Autumn Shelter presented authentic equipment, documents, and personal effects exactly as they had been left when the facility was abruptly abandoned in October 1962. Emma, now 15 and showing unexpected interest in historical interpretation, had trained as a junior guide for student groups. This was a place where real people prepared for the worst-case scenario, she explained to a group of middle school visitors during the opening weekend. They monitored communication channels, maintained equipment, and stood ready to coordinate emergency responses if nuclear war had actually happened. Her confidence in this role marked a dramatic evolution from the reluctant teenager who had initially viewed their move to rural Montana as a personal catastrophe. The bunker that had seemed like another burden in their difficult circumstances had instead become a source of pride and purpose. Dr. Reynolds, whose academic career had flourished through his association with the discovery, had developed a particular interest in the human stories behind Autumn Shelter. His research team had managed to locate and interview several surviving family members of personnel who had served at the facility, collecting oral histories that added crucial personal dimensions to the historical record. Major Lawton's daughter provided us with letters he wrote during his time at the installation, Dr. Reynolds explained during a special presentation for Historical Society members. He never explicitly mentioned where he was stationed. Security protocols prohibited that, but he described the Montana landscape and local community in ways that helped us understand how these men experienced their classified assignment. The collection of personal narratives had grown into a broader initiative, documenting how the Cold War had shaped ordinary American lives in the region. Community members contributed family stories, photographs, and memorabilia, reflecting civil defense preparations, fallout shelter construction, and the underlying anxiety that had characterized the era. This community engagement component, initially conceived as a supplementary educational effort, had unexpectedly become one of the site's most valuable contributions. By connecting classified military history to everyday civilian experiences, Autumn Shelter offered a holistic perspective that resonated with visitors from diverse backgrounds. Tourism had transformed Pinewood Valley's struggling economy, with the historical site drawing thousands of visitors in its first months of operation. The influx created opportunities for local businesses. A new bed and breakfast opened in a previously vacant Victorian home. The general store expanded its hours and inventory, and 2 new restaurants opened on the previously sleepy main street. For Sarah, the professional dimensions of the project had evolved in unexpected directions. While maintaining her position at the medical center, she had developed expertise in managing the complex partnership between government agencies, historical organizations, and the local community. Her unique perspective as both property owner and healthcare professional brought valuable insights to discussions about preservation priorities and community impact. We never anticipated the therapeutic aspects of this project. she explained during a panel discussion at a regional historical preservation conference. Older community members who lived through the Cold War era have found meaning and healing by sharing their experiences with younger generations. The site has become a place for intergenerational dialogue about how societies respond to existential threats. This observation had sparked interest from psychology researchers studying collective trauma and historical memory, adding an academic dimension that extended beyond traditional historical preservation. Graduate students from several universities had developed research projects examining how physical spaces like Autumn Shelter shaped public understanding of historical events. Colonel Harper, whose initial involvement had focused on securing classified materials, remained connected to the project in an evolving capacity. Her military expertise provided crucial context for interpreting the facility's strategic significance, while her administrative skills helped navigate the bureaucratic complexities of the ongoing government partnership. The Department of Defense has established Autumn Shelter as a case study for future historical preservation initiatives involving decommissioned military installations, she noted during a planning meeting for the site's expansion. The balanced approach we've developed here, respecting national security considerations while maximizing educational access, provides a template that could be applied elsewhere. That expansion involved carefully opening additional sections of the underground complex for specialized tours and research opportunities. The second phase, scheduled for completion the following spring, would include the command center, where tactical decisions would have been made during crisis scenarios, and the communication hub that had maintained contact with other installations. In the strategic network, these areas contained particularly sensitive equipment and documentation, requiring additional conservation efforts and security measures before public access could be permitted. The preservation team, led by specialists from the Smithsonian, worked meticulously to stabilize artifacts and prepare appropriate contextual information for eventual visitors. Each room presents unique conservation challenges, explained Dr. Eleanor Winters, the lead preservation specialist. The environment remained remarkably stable for decades, but introducing human presence, even controlled visitation, requires careful monitoring of temperature, humidity, and light exposure to prevent deterioration. The technical complexity of preserving Cold War-era equipment had attracted interest from technology historians and vintage computing enthusiasts. Several early computer systems discovered in the facility's analysis center represented transitional technology between vacuum tube systems and solid-state electronics, offering valuable insights into computing evolution. A partnership with the National Museum of American History had developed around these technological artifacts, creating opportunities for specialized research access that complemented the general public tours. Doctoral candidates in technology history conducted careful documentation of systems that had previously been known only through technical manuals and photographs. For Emma and Ethan, the extraordinary circumstances of their home had become normalized. The constant presence of researchers, the scheduled tour groups, the security personnel who maintained a discreet perimeter around the facility. Their initial apprehension about rural isolation had transformed into appreciation for the unique educational environment their unusual home provided. Ethan, now 12, and developing keen interest in engineering, had become fascinated with the mechanical systems that had sustained the underground facility. The ventilation design, water purification technology, and power generation equipment represented ingenious solutions to the challenge of creating a self-contained environment capable of supporting human life for extended periods. The air circulation system uses principles we still apply in modern builds, explained Terry Watkins, a mechanical engineer who volunteered weekends with the preservation team. These designers were working with limited technology, but unlimited creativity. They developed redundant systems decades ahead of their time. Under Terry's mentorship, Ethan had begun designing his own models of sustainable underground systems, combining historical approaches with contemporary environmental considerations. His science fair project, a miniaturized, modernized version of Autumn Shelter's water recycling system, had won regional recognition and attracted interest from environmental engineering programs. Emma's academic trajectory had similarly been influenced by her unusual home environment. Her initial historical research project had evolved into serious interest in archival preservation and document conservation. Working alongside professional archivists cataloging the facility's paper records, she had developed technical skills and historical knowledge that positioned her well for future studies. "These documents tell stories that would otherwise be lost," she observed, while carefully photographing a set of technical manuals for digital preservation. Every instruction sheet, every handwritten note on a maintenance log, they're all pieces of how people experienced this place and this moment in history. The Mitchell farmhouse itself had undergone careful renovation, balancing modern comfort with historical character. Sarah had worked with preservation-minded contractors to maintain the property's architectural integrity while incorporating sustainable technologies that reduce their environmental footprint and operating costs. Solar panels discreetly positioned on outbuilding roofs provided supplementary power, while a modern heat pump system reduced dependency on fossil fuels. These improvements, partially funded through historic preservation grants, demonstrated how heritage properties could be sensitively adapted for contemporary living standards. The surrounding landscape had similarly been restored, with native plantings replacing invasive species and traditional agricultural patterns re-established in portions of the property. A heritage garden project, developed in collaboration with the local agricultural extension office, cultivated plant varieties that would have been common during the Cold War era. This holistic approach to preservation, encompassing not just the underground facility but the agricultural context that had provided its cover, offered visitors a more complete understanding of how strategic military installations had been integrated into ordinary American landscapes during the Cold War period. Frank Thompson, whose early support had been crucial during the Mitchell family's challenging transition, had become an official part of the project as a community historian. His decades in the region and personal military experiences during the Cold War period provided valuable perspective that enriched the site's educational programming. "You can read all the government documents you want," Frank told a tour group of history teachers, "but understanding how ordinary folks experienced this era requires different kinds of sources. People around here built backyard shelters, stocked emergency supplies, watched the skies. The military installation was secret, but the fear was public knowledge." His oral history initiative, recording recollections from longtime Pinewood Valley residents, had produced a rich archive documenting rural American experiences during global political tensions. These community memories, presented alongside the official military history of Autumn Shelter, created a multi-dimensional narrative that resonated with visitors. The educational dimensions of the project continued to expand, with curriculum materials developed for various grade levels and specialized programs for advanced students. A summer institute for history teachers brought educators from across the country to develop teaching methodologies using Cold War history as a framework for critical thinking skills. Primary sources like those preserved at Autumn Shelter provide unparalleled opportunities for students to engage directly with historical evidence, noted Dr. Catherine Jenkins, an educational consultant who helped develop the teacher training program. They can analyze actual documents, examine authentic technology, and draw their own conclusions about this pivotal historical period. The most ambitious educational initiative, a scholarship program for local students pursuing studies in EU, historical preservation, museum management or related fields, had received its first applications. Funded through a combination of admission fees, government grants and private donations, the program would provide substantial support for Pinewood Valley graduates pursuing higher education. For Sarah, watching these expanding ripple effects from their discovery brought profound satisfaction. What had begun as a desperate attempt to secure affordable housing had evolved into something with genuine significance, not just for her family, but for the broader community and historical record. The financial aspects certainly mattered. The combination of site management compensation, easement payments, and revenue sharing provided stability that would have seemed impossible during their final struggling months in Riverstone. Emma's college prospects had brightened considerably, with both scholarship possibilities and impressive extracurricular credentials from her work at the historical site. But the less tangible impacts resonated more deeply. Ethan's growing confidence as he pursued his engineering interests, Emma's development from reluctant teenager to engaged young historian, the genuine friendships that had formed with colleagues. From diverse backgrounds, these human dimensions represented the discovery's most meaningful legacy. One evening, as autumn painted the Montana landscape in brilliant colors, Sarah sat on the farmhouse porch with Dr. Reynolds, whose regular research visits had gradually evolved into a meaningful personal relationship. The preservation team had departed for the day. Security staff maintained their discreet presence near the barn, and the property had settled into evening tranquility. "I've been thinking about Major Lawton lately," Dr. Reynolds remarked, referring to the installation's last commanding officer, whose journal had provided crucial insights into the facility's abrupt abandonment. How strange it would seem to him that the emergency bunker he was forced to leave during a moment of crisis would eventually become a place of education and reflection. Sarah nodded, considering the peculiar historical symmetry. He was preparing for a worst-case scenario that thankfully never happened. Instead, 60 years later, what he helped create became a best-case scenario for a family facing our own kind of crisis. Their conversation was interrupted by Ethan's emergence from the barn with Terry Watkins, the volunteer engineer. The two were engaged in animated discussion about modifications to Ethan's science project, their shared enthusiasm transcending the 4-decade age difference between them. "We're going to recalibrate the filtration metrics," Ethan announced, his vocabulary reflecting months of immersion in specialized engineering concepts. "Terry thinks we can improve efficiency by at least 20%. As they disappeared into the workshop that had been established in a renovated outbuilding, Emma emerged from the house with Colonel Harper. The teenager had been assisting with cataloging newly discovered personnel records, developing archival skills under professional guidance. "We found photographs of the original construction," Emma reported excitedly. "They show the barn being built around the entrance after the underground portions were completed. There's even documentation of how they disguised the construction activity from aerial observation." Sarah watched her daughter's animated conversation with the colonel, reflecting on how completely their circumstances had transformed. The property, that had initially represented compromise and limitation, had instead offered expansion and opportunity, not just materially, but intellectually and socially. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and the property had quieted, Sarah walked alone to the barn. Security lighting illuminated the structure's restored exterior, while subtle landscape lighting marked the pathways that would guide visitors when tours resumed the following morning. Inside, she used her security clearance to access the elevator that descended to Autumn's shelter, The underground facility had become so familiar that she sometimes forgot how extraordinary it had seemed during that first discovery. Now, after countless hours spent working with preservation specialists and educational consultants, she moved through the illuminated corridors with the ease of someone navigating their own home. She paused in what had been the staff relaxation area, where off-duty personnel had spent their limited leisure time during rotation assignments. Playing cards still lay on a table where a game had been abruptly abandoned during the 1962 evacuation order. Books lined shelves along one wall, technical manuals interspersed with popular novels of the period. A chess game remained eternally in mid-play, the pieces preserved exactly as they had been left. These human touches, evidence of ordinary moments lived in extraordinary circumstances, had become Sarah's favorite aspects of the facility. Beyond the strategic significance and technological systems, Autumn Shelter told a story of people performing their duties while maintaining the rhythms of normal life deep beneath the Montana soil, prepared for apocalyptic scenarios while reading paperback westerns and playing card games during off hours. In the communications room, vintage teletype machines stood silent beside early computer systems designed to process strategic information. The preservation team had carefully restored selected equipment to functional status for demonstration. Purposes: allowing visitors to experience the technological capabilities and limitations of the era. Sarah's reflection was interrupted by a notification on her phone, a reminder about the following day's scheduled meeting with representatives from the National Park Service. The agency had expressed interest in potentially designating Autumn Shelter as a National Historic Landmark, recognition that would bring additional resources and protection while affirming the site's significance in American history. This possibility, unimaginable during those first overwhelming days after the discovery, represented yet another example of how completely their circumstances had evolved. The Burden property with the dilapidated barn, purchased out of financial necessity rather than choice, had revealed itself as a unique historical treasure with national significance. As Sarah returned to the surface and walked back toward the farmhouse, she paused to appreciate the night sky, brilliant with stars, undiminished by urban light pollution. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the anxious vigilance that had characterized the Cold War era when Autumn Shelter stood ready for catastrophic scenarios. The following morning brought the National Park Service delegation, a team of assessment specialists who would evaluate the site's historical significance and preservation quality as part of the landmark designation process. Their visit represented another milestone in the continuous evolution of the project, potentially establishing Autumn Shelter's permanent place in the nation's preserved historical landscape. Sarah guided the delegation through the visitor experience, beginning with the contextual presentations in the Welcome Center and progressing to the carefully preserved underground spaces. The specialists took detailed notes, asked informed questions about conservation methodologies, and examined documentation of the discovery and subsequent preservation efforts. What makes this site particularly remarkable, observed the delegation's lead historian, is the combination of perfect preservation and comprehensive documentation. We can trace the facility's complete history from initial construction through active service to rediscovery, a continuity rarely found with Cold War installations. The technical specialist examined the environmental control systems that maintained optimal preservation conditions. The integration of modern conservation technology with the original infrastructure represents best practices in historical site management. You've balanced authenticity with sustainability in exemplary fashion. For Sarah, this professional validation reinforced the extraordinary journey from accidental discovery to nationally recognized historical preservation. The frightening uncertainty that had characterized their first weeks of property ownership had given way to unanticipated purpose and accomplishment. As the delegation continued their assessment, local school buses arrived with student groups, participating in the site's educational programs. The carefully developed curriculum materials, designed for various grade levels, used Autumn Shelter as a focal point for exploring broader historical themes, from technological development to political tensions between superpowers. Emma guided elementary students through age-appropriate activities in the education center, helping them understand how everyday American life had been shaped by international political tensions. Her confident interaction with the young visitors demonstrated how completely she had embraced their unusual circumstances, finding personal meaning in sharing this historical narrative. Ethan, meanwhile, demonstrated working models of the facility's mechanical systems to a middle school technology. Glub, explaining engineering principles with enthusiasm that transcended the age difference between presenter and audience. His developing expertise reflected countless hours spent with volunteer mentors who recognized and nurtured his technical interests. The Park Service delegation observed these educational activities with evident approval. The integration of professional historical preservation with community education represents the ideal outcome for historically significant sites, noted their educational assessment specialist. You've created meaningful connections between academic understanding and public engagement. As the assessment visit concluded, the delegation's leader offered preliminary feedback that suggested favorable consideration for landmark designation. The unanimous opinion of our team is that Autumn Shelter represents a historical resource of exceptional national significance. The preservation quality, educational programming, and management approach all meet or exceed our standards for landmark status. This provisional endorsement, while still subject to formal review processes, affirmed the collaborative model that had developed around the site. A partnership between government agencies, academic institutions, the local community, and the Mitchell family that balanced diverse priorities while preserving an important historical resource. For Sarah, watching the delegation depart as another tour group arrived, the continuous evolution of their unlikely discovery remained somewhat surreal. The desperate financial circumstances that had driven their relocation to Pinewood Valley seemed increasingly distant, replaced by purposeful activity and unexpected opportunity. 5 years had passed since Sarah Mitchell first turned her aging Subaru onto the unpaved road, leading to what locals had once dismissively called the old Henderson place. The transformation that had unfolded in that half-decade surpassed anything she could have imagined during those first anxious days of property ownership. Autumn Shelter National Historic Landmark now appeared on official tourism maps, drawing visitors from across the country and beyond. The National Park Service designation, awarded 2 years earlier after rigorous evaluation, had elevated the site's profile and provided additional resources for preservation and educational programming. What had begun as an accidental discovery beneath a dilapidated barn had evolved into a nationally recognized historical treasure with far-reaching impact. On this particular morning, Sarah stood in the Welcome Center reviewing final preparations for a special event, the dedication of the major Robert Lawton Research Center, a purpose-built facility adjacent to the original underground bunker. Named for the installation's last commanding officer, whose journal had provided crucial insights into the facility's hasty abandonment during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the center would house expanded archives, research facilities, and educational resources. The Secretary of Defense's plane landed 20 minutes ago, Colonel Harper informed her, checking updates on her tablet. The motorcade should arrive within the hour. Now 5 years into what had initially been a temporary assignment, Harper had become the Department of Defense's permanent liaison to Autumn Shelter, her career path aligning with the site's unique status within military historical preservation. Sarah nodded, mentally reviewing the ceremony schedule. The governor confirmed yesterday, and Dr. Reynolds is bringing the Lawton family members, the major's daughter and 2 grandchildren. They're especially interested in seeing the personal quarters we've recently restored. The dedication ceremony represented another milestone in Autumn Shelter's evolution from classified military installation to educational landmark. The new research center would accommodate growing scholarly interest while preserving the original underground facility in its authentic condition. Designed with understated architecture that complemented the rural landscape, the building created additional capacity without compromising the property's historical integrity. Beyond the Welcome Center windows, Pinewood Valley displayed its own remarkable transformation. The once struggling rural community had developed into a thriving small town with a revitalized main street, renovated historic buildings, and new businesses catering to the steady stream of visitors. The Autumn Shelter Economic Impact Study, conducted by a state university research team, had documented substantial growth in employment, property values, and tax revenue directly attributable to the historical site. Sarah's reflections were interrupted by Emma's arrival. At 19, her daughter bore little resemblance to the reluctant teenager who had viewed their move to rural Montana as domestic exile. Confident and purposeful, Emma had developed into a poised young woman whose unusual upbringing had shaped distinctive strengths. The audio-visual setup is complete, and the caterers are arranging everything according to plan, Emma reported. Recently accepted to a prestigious Eastern university with a generous scholarship, she had deferred enrollment for a year to continue her work with the historical site's educational programs, experience that would align perfectly with her planned studies in museum science and public history. "Thanks for handling those details," Sarah replied, noting her daughter's professional demeanor. "Is your brother ready for his presentation?" Emma smiled. "Ethan's been rehearsing all morning. He's nervous about speaking to such a distinguished audience, but Terry's been helping him prepare. His demonstration model works perfectly." At 16, Ethan had developed his childhood interest in engineering into genuine expertise. Under mentorship from professionals associated with the historical site, he had created functional scale models of Autumn Shelter's mechanical systems, demonstrating how Cold War engineers had solved complex environmental challenges with limited technology. His innovative educational materials had attracted attention from STEM education specialists and engineering programs across the country. The Mitchell family's journey mirrored Autumn Shelter's evolution, from precarious beginnings to unexpected fulfillment. Sarah's part-time position at the local medical center had expanded to include specialized work in historical site accessibility, ensuring that visitors with physical limitations could meaningfully experience Cold War history. This professional niche, combining her healthcare background with historical preservation, had generated speaking invitations at museum conferences and consultation requests from other historical sites. Beyond professional development, their personal lives had flourished in ways impossible to predict during those first challenging months. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, whose initial involvement stemmed from academic interest in Cold War architecture, had become an integral part of their family life. His relationship with Sarah had developed gradually from professional collaboration to deep personal connection, culminating in marriage 2 years earlier in a ceremony held in the farmhouse garden. The sound of approaching vehicles announced the vanguard of official guests. Through the Welcome Center windows, Sarah watched the procession of black SUVs that signaled government dignitaries. The Secretary of Defense had made Autumn Shelter a priority, recognizing its value in preserving crucial aspects of military history while fostering public understanding of strategic challenges. "Showtime," Colonel Harper noted with professional aplomb, moving toward the entrance to greet the official delegation. Sarah took a moment to straighten her jacket, the formality of the occasion requiring more professional attire than her usual site management clothing. The nervous uncertainty that had once characterized her approach to such high-profile events had gradually been replaced by confidence born from experience. After 5 years managing complex relationships between government agencies, academic institutions, and the local community, she had developed diplomatic skills that complemented her preservation expertise. Outside, the property displayed its own remarkable transformation. The farmhouse, once weather-beaten and neglected, had been meticulously restored to its original character while incorporating modern systems for comfort and efficiency. The barn, structurally reinforced and aesthetically revitalized, housed the access point to the underground facility, along with exhibits documenting the discovery and preservation process. Landscaping reflected both historical accuracy and environmental sensitivity, with native plantings that required minimal irrigation and maintenance. Heritage agricultural areas demonstrated traditional farming practices from the Cold War era, providing context for how the military installation had been disguised within an operating farm. The motorcade arrived with precise timing, security. Personnel establishing perimeters as official vehicles delivered the distinguished guests. The Secretary of Defense emerged first, a tall, distinguished woman whose military background informed her appreciation for historical preservation. Governor Harrison followed, along with congressional representatives and military officers whose presence underscored the event's significance. Sarah greeted them with practiced formality that balanced professional respect with genuine welcome. Secretary Wilson, Governor Harrison, thank you for joining us for this milestone in Autumn Shelter's development. Secretary Wilson shook Sarah's hand warmly. Mrs. Mitchell Reynolds, the department's appreciation for your stewardship of this national treasure continues to grow. Your partnership model has become our standard for similar historical preservation initiatives. This recognition, coming from the highest levels of government, reflected how completely the accidental discovery had transcended its humble beginnings. What had started as a desperate family seeking affordable housing had evolved into a nationally recognized approach to preserving sensitive historical sites while maximizing educational impact. As the official guests moved toward the ceremony location, Dr. Reynolds arrived with the Lawton family members, Eleanor Lawton Davis, now in her 70s, accompanied by her adult children. As Major Lawton's surviving daughter, Eleanor had provided invaluable personal context about her father's military service and the impact of his classified assignment on family life. Sarah, Eleanor greeted her with genuine warmth. The developments since our last visit are remarkable. Father would be astonished to see how his emergency command post has been transformed into such a meaningful educational resource. This personal connection to the facility's original purpose had enriched the historical interpretation, moving beyond technical specifications and strategic doctrine to include human dimensions of Cold War military service. Eleanor's contribution of family photographs, letters, and recollections had created a more complete narrative about the men who had staffed Autumn Shelter during heightened international tensions. The dedication ceremony took place on a platform overlooking both the historic barn and the newly constructed research center. Distinguished guests took their places as community members, preservation specialists, and media representatives gathered. For the occasion, Frank Thompson, now in his late 70s, but still actively involved with the site's oral history program, had been given a seat of honor in recognition of his crucial early support. Governor Harrison spoke first, emphasizing the economic and cultural impact Autumn Shelter had generated for Montana. This site has created a model for how historical preservation can revitalize rural communities while educating the public about crucial aspects of our national experience. The ripple effects extend far beyond Pinewood Valley to influence heritage tourism throughout our state. Secretary Wilson followed, placing Autumn Shelter within the broader context of military historical preservation. The Department of Defense recognizes that understanding our strategic past is essential for navigating future challenges. This facility preserves not just artifacts and documents, but the intellectual framework that shaped national security decisions during a pivotal historical period. The most moving remarks came from Eleanor Lawton Davis, who spoke about her father's commitment to duty during uncertain times. Robert Lawton never spoke directly about his classified assignment here. Security protocols prevented that. But he instilled in his family a deep appreciation for service and sacrifice. That his command post has become a place of learning would give him profound satisfaction. Following the formal remarks, Sarah presented the official opening of the research center that would bear Major Lawton's name. This facility will extend Autumn Shelter's educational mission by providing scholars, students, and community members with expanded access to our growing archival collections. We balance preservation of the past with engagement for the future, ensuring that Cold War history remains relevant for new generations. The ceremonial ribbon cutting drew applause from the assembled guests, many of whom had witnessed Autumn Shelter's evolution from initial discovery to national landmark. The transition from classified military installation to educational resource represented a hopeful narrative about finding new purpose in historical structures, a theme that resonated beyond this specific site. Following the ceremony, guided tours provided dignitaries with first-hand experience of both the underground facility and the new research center. Ethan, overcoming his nervousness about addressing such distinguished visitors, demonstrated his scale models of Autumn Shelter's environmental systems with growing confidence. The original engineers developed remarkably efficient solutions with 1950s technology, he explained, activating the working components of his demonstration unit. By studying these approaches through a modern sustainability lens, we can apply historical innovations to contemporary challenges. His presentation impressed the technical specialists among the visitors, generating discussions about potential applications in current military infrastructure. The Secretary of Defense spent several minutes asking detailed questions about his research methodology and findings, her engineering background informing genuine interest in his work. Meanwhile, Emma guided Eleanor Lawton Davis and her family through newly restored portions of the underground facility, including the personnel quarters where Major Lawton had maintained his private office. The preservation team had recently completed work on these spaces, returning them to their original 1962 condition based on detailed documentation and Eleanor's recollections of her father's descriptions. This desk matches the one in the photographs father brought home after the facility was supposedly decommissioned, Eleanor observed, examining the restored office space. He mentioned a hidden compartment where he kept personal items separate from official documentation. Emma nodded, gently sliding open a concealed drawer in the desk's side panel. We discovered it during the restoration. Inside was this. She carefully removed a small leather case containing a gold pocket watch inscribed with Major Lawton's initials. We wanted you to be the one to decide its future. Eleanor held the watch with evident emotion. His father Gave him this when he graduated from the academy. He must have left it behind during the emergency evacuation. She turned to Sarah, who had joined them. It belongs here, as part of the exhibit about the human experience of Cold War service. This personal connection to the site's history exemplified Autumn Shelter's evolving narrative, moving beyond strategic doctrine and technological systems to encompass individual stories of those who had served during uncertain times. Visitors consistently reported that these human elements created the most meaningful connections to historical events that might otherwise seem distant and abstract. As the official events transitioned to a reception in the research center's newly completed conference facility, Sarah found a moment to step outside for a brief respite from the day's formalities. The Montana landscape stretched before her, rolling hills, distant mountains, and clear sky creating a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the apocalyptic scenarios once contemplated within Autumn Shelter's reinforced concrete walls. Frank Thompson joined her, moving more slowly these days, but maintaining the sharp observation that had characterized their first meeting 5 years earlier. "Quite a difference from when you were trying to patch that leaky roof," he noted with characteristic understatement. "Henderson would never believe what's happened here." "Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself," Sarah admitted. "Everything changed because Ethan noticed a metal door in the barn floor." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "History works that way sometimes, turning points that nobody recognizes until long afterward. All those strategic planners building secret bunkers, and it's a curious kid who ultimately makes the difference." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a staff member announcing that the Secretary of Defense was requesting Sarah's presence for discussions about the next phase of Autumn Shelter's development. The historic preservation success had generated interest in expanding the model to other decommissioned military sites, creating potential for a national network of Cold War educational resources. Inside the research center, Secretary Wilson had gathered key stakeholders to explore this broader initiative. The Autumn Shelter model has demonstrated that sensitive historical sites can be simultaneously preserved and made accessible with appropriate partnerships, she explained as Sarah joined them. "We're identifying additional facilities that might benefit from similar approaches. The proposed network would create educational corridors linking related sites across multiple states, allowing visitors to experience different aspects of Cold War history within regional contexts. Autumn Shelter, as the pioneering example, would serve as the coordinating hub for this ambitious expansion of historical tourism and education. We are particularly interested in your perspective on balancing private property considerations with public access," the Secretary continued. "Your experience navigating these complexities provides valuable guidance for approaching other property owners who might unknowingly have historically significant sites. This national leadership role represented yet another unexpected dimension of their journey from accidental discovery to preservation exemplar." Sarah's thoughtful approach to managing competing priorities, historical authenticity, educational access, security considerations, and family privacy had established principles, now recognized as best practices in the field. As the high-profile visitors departed and the property returned to its normal operations, Sarah joined her family for a quiet dinner at the farmhouse. The contrast between formal ceremony and domestic comfort reflected the unusual balance they had achieved, maintaining personal normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. "I think Dad would have been proud of my presentation," Ethan remarked, his earlier nervousness replaced by quiet satisfaction. "Secretary Wilson asked for copies of my research on sustainable applications of Cold War engineering principles. Emma added her own observations about the day's significance. Eleanor Lawton Davis invited me to visit the family archives in Washington. they have additional materials about Major Lawton's military career that might provide context for our exhibits. Dr. Reynolds, who had spent the afternoon discussing academic partnerships with university representatives, shared developments from those conversations. The consortium agreement is moving forward. 5 universities collaborating on an interdisciplinary research program centered around Cold War studies, with Autumn Shelter as the primary field location. Their discussion reflected how completely the unexpected discovery had transformed not just their physical circumstances, but their individual trajectories. Each family member had found unique purpose connected to the historical site. Professional, development, academic opportunity, and meaningful engagement with nationally significant preservation. Later that evening, after the others had retired, Sarah stood on the farmhouse porch, gazing toward the illuminated research center that now complemented the historic barn. The architectural lighting, designed to minimize environmental impact, while ensuring security, created a subtle presence that respected the rural landscape's natural darkness. The journey from financial desperation to national prominence seemed almost implausible in retrospect. The foreclosure notices and mounting medical bills that had driven their relocation to Pinewood Valley had given way to stability and purpose. Neither she nor the children could have anticipated when they first viewed the weathered property. Beyond their personal transformation, the ripple effects continued to expand. Pinewood Valley's revitalization had created opportunities for long-time residents while attracting new community members drawn by the area's growing reputation. Young families now moved to the once declining town, bringing energy and commitment to local institutions, from schools to civic organizations. The educational impact extended far beyond Montana's borders through digital initiatives that brought Autumn Shelter's resources to classrooms nationwide. Virtual tours, curriculum materials, and interactive learning modules allowed students in diverse locations to engage with Cold War history through this perfectly preserved time capsule. Academic researchers from disciplines ranging from political science to environmental engineering found valuable resources in the expanding archives and physical facilities. Dissertation projects, scholarly publications, and specialized conferences had developed around Autumn Shelter's unique combination of preserved infrastructure and comprehensive documentation. Sarah's reflections were interrupted by a notification on her tablet, a message from Colonel Harper regarding an unexpected discovery during archival processing. Newly examined documents suggested connections between Autumn Shelter and other classified installations that had previously remained undocumented, potentially expanding understanding of the facility's strategic significance. This ongoing process of discovery characterized the project's evolution, each answered question generating new avenues for exploration as researchers pieced together the complex narrative of Cold War strategic planning. Even 5 years after the initial finding, Autumn Shelter continued to yield insights that enhanced historical understanding. The following morning brought the familiar rhythm of site operations as staff prepared for regular visitors while research teams continued their specialized work. The heightened security and media presence from the dedication ceremony had diminished, allowing return to the balanced approach that had characterized Autumn Shelter's development. Sarah began her day with a planning meeting for the site's expanding educational programs. The new research center created opportunities for advanced initiatives beyond the established tour programs and classroom materials that had formed the core offerings during the first years of operation. The University Consortium wants to establish a summer institute for high school history teachers, explained Dr. Elaine Perkins, the education director who had joined the staff 2 years earlier. 3-week intensive programs using Autumn Shelter as a case study for teaching Cold War history through primary sources and physical artifacts. This teacher training dimension represented another expanding ripple effect, multiplying impact by equipping educators with enhanced knowledge and methodologies they would carry back to classrooms across the country. The program design included follow-up support throughout the academic year, creating sustained connections between the historical site and participating schools. Beyond formal education, community engagement initiatives continued to evolve. The Oral History Project, which had initially focused on documenting local experiences during the Cold War era, had expanded to include intergenerational dialogue programs bringing together seniors who had lived through that historical period with students studying its impact. Frank Thompson's leadership has been invaluable, Sarah noted, reviewing the project's recent developments. His combination of military background and community connections creates trust that allows people to share meaningful personal recollections. As the meeting concluded, Sarah received notification that unexpected visitors had arrived. Representatives from the Smithsonian Institution who had participated in the initial preservation efforts 5 years earlier. Their return visit focused on evaluating autumn shelters' conservation methodologies for potential application to other historically significant sites in the National Museum system. Dr. Eleanor Winters, who had led the original conservation team, embraced Sarah warmly. "You've maintained impeccable preservation standards while expanding access, the balance we all hope to achieve but rarely manage so successfully." Their tour of both the original facility and the new research center generated productive discussions about evolving best practices in historical preservation. Autumn shelters' unique circumstances, perfect initial preservation, followed by carefully managed access, provided valuable case studies for conservators dealing with sensitive historical materials. The environmental monitoring data you've compiled over 5 years of operation is particularly valuable, Dr. Winters noted, as they examined the sophisticated systems that maintained optimal conditions for artifact preservation. The long-term effects of controlled visitation on previously sealed environments will inform preservation planning for similar sites. This recognition from leading museum professionals affirmed the collaborative approach that had characterized Autumn Shelter's development, balancing historical authenticity with educational access, technological innovation with respect for original materials, and security considerations with public engagement. As afternoon approached, Sarah joined a regularly scheduled tour group to observe the visitor experience that had been continuously refined based on feedback and evaluation. The group included history enthusiasts from across the country, educators researching potential field trip opportunities, and individuals with personal connections to the Cold War era. Ethan, who had developed into a compelling tour guide despite his natural inclination toward engineering rather than public speaking, led the group through the underground facility with evident knowledge and enthusiasm. His technical expertise enhanced understanding of complex systems, while his youth created interesting contrasts when describing historical events that had occurred decades before his birth. The communication technology in this room represented cutting-edge capability in 1962, he explained, indicating the vintage equipment arranged exactly as it had been left during the hasty evacuation. Today, your smartphone contains more computing, power than this entire facility, but these systems were engineered with remarkable redundancy and durability that remains impressive. Visitors responded with engaged questions that reflected genuine interest in understanding both technological evolution and historical context. The tour design intentionally balanced technical information with human narratives, helping participants connect emotionally with the facility's original purpose and the individuals who had staffed it during uncertain times. Following the main Tour participants could choose specialized focus areas based on personal interests, technological systems, strategic planning, daily life for facility personnel, or connections to local community experiences during the Cold War era. This customization enhanced engagement while managing visitor flow through sensitive areas of the underground complex. As the day's activities concluded and staff prepared for evening closure, Sarah received a video call from a History Channel production team developing a documentary series on forgotten Cold War sites. Autumn Shelter's perfect preservation had attracted substantial media attention, with documentary features providing additional exposure that supplemented the site's marketing resources. We're particularly interested in the human stories connected to the facility, the producer explained. The combination of Major Lawton's journal, Eleanor's family recollections, and your own discovery narrative creates compelling personal dimensions that help viewers connect with the historical significance. This human-centered approach to historical interpretation had become Autumn Shelter's distinctive contribution to public history, demonstrating how physical preservation of structures and artifacts could be enhanced through thoughtful integration of personal narratives. Visitors consistently identified these human connections as the most meaningful aspects of their experience at the site. As evening settled over the property, Sarah completed final reviews of operational reports before joining her family for dinner. The farmhouse kitchen, once sparse and utilitarian during those first challenging months, had evolved into a warm gathering place that reflected their journey from uncertainty to fulfillment. Emma, preparing for her upcoming university studies while maintaining involvement with the historical site, shared developments from her work with recently acquired archival materials. The preservation team found additional photographs in a storage container we hadn't previously examined, images showing the facility during active operation with personnel at their stations. These previously unknown visual records would enhance exhibits about daily operations, providing authentic glimpses of how the underground complex had functioned as a working installation. The continuous discovery of new materials demonstrated how much remained to be learned about Autumn Shelter despite 5 years of intensive research and documentation. Ethan described his experiences guiding the Secretary of Defense through technical aspects of the facility during the previous days' ceremonies. She actually understood the engineering principles behind the air filtration system, he noted with evident respect. She asked really insightful questions about how we might apply similar redundancy approaches to contemporary military infrastructure. Dr. Reynolds added perspective from his academic colleagues who had participated in the research center dedication. The consortium universities are developing joint funding proposals for expanded Cold War studies programs. Autumn Shelter has created a focal point for interdisciplinary scholarship that transcends traditional academic boundaries. Their conversation reflected the multi-layered impact of their unexpected discovery. Personal development intertwined with professional opportunity, individual growth connected to community revitalization and family stability, emerging from what had initially appeared to be desperate circumstances. As night fell completely, Sarah stepped outside for a final moment of reflection before retiring. The stars shone brilliantly above Montana's dark landscape, unchanged from when the underground facility had been constructed during heightened Cold War tensions. The continuity of that star-filled sky above a landscape marked by human history offered perspective on their small but significant role in preserving important chapters of American experience. The dilapidated barn that had seemed worthless 5 years earlier now protected an underground facility recognized as a national historic landmark. The desperate financial circumstances that had driven their relocation to Pinewood Valley had given way to stability and purpose, none of them could have anticipated when they first ventured down that unpaved driveway. Most meaningfully, the accidentally discovered Cold War facility, built during humanity's closest approach to nuclear catastrophe, had ultimately created opportunity, education, and community renewal. There was profound symmetry in this outcome, a redemptive narrative in which preparations for civilization's darkest possibilities had ultimately yielded light. Sarah turned toward the farmhouse, where warm illumination spilled from windows that no longer leaked during Montana storms. The Joint Chiefs of Staff helicopters that had dramatically arrived on their property years earlier had given way to scheduled tour buses and research teams, transforming crisis response into ongoing education and preservation. The burden she had reluctantly accepted had become the blessing she had never anticipated, reminding her that sometimes life's most significant discoveries come disguised as misfortune, waiting beneath weathered floorboards for someone curious. Enough to look deeper. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.